All Waves Considered. I'm your host, John Gaynor Green.
And I'm your host, Julius Spicciani. So we're here to talk about the surf from March 9th, 2024. Can you tell me a little bit about it? It was way better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. The forecast wasn't showing it going offshore and being offshore all day. And normally, you surf it around here enough that normally when it goes offshore, it does not last, especially all day.
Mm-hmm.
That was a treat.
Yeah, someone had told me it was supposed to go offshore at 4 and ended up being like 9 o'clock or something. It went offshore.
Yeah, one of the terms my generation uses is dark 30. And they also like to say that Pensacola Beach has the best surf at midnight of anywhere in the world.
That's funny. I haven't heard that, but I have heard a lot of people complain that it goes offshore right at dark.
Well, what a lot of that's due to is the effect of Mobile Bay. We've talked to different weather professionals before and asked them why it is that the offshore winds that we see on the wind maps stay west of us and will not push through until the sun sets and well after dark, and suddenly the wind, it's offshore Mobile and west, but it just doesn't seem to quite get here in time to give us a full day of offshore winds. But it's done a better job of that lately, but it has something to do with Mobile Bay and the heating of the land and the cooling. When it comes to fronts, they get disrupted as they're trying to move through and they hit that body of water, because that's the direction they come from to bring us the wind. So, and we were lucky that the wind wasn't ballistic. It was solid. Sometimes when our surf gets big enough, that offshore wind needs to get fairly solid just to clean it up. It can go offshore from 0 to 5 and the surf still doesn't get organized. It got pretty steady yesterday. I don't think it ever got to be too much. The waves didn't have as much pop as they looked like they should have had.
Yeah, they were absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, when I first looked at them, I'm like, holy cow. This is... We surf so much mediocre waves, and we're happy for them, but like when we get those beautiful lines, it's so special.
Burns into your memory banks, into your cranial hard drive. You remember those. And a lot of people, I've got a pretty good memory bank from 50-something years of doing this. Some guys are really good. They remember the day and the year.
Yeah.
I've got too many decades of doing this to remember the day and the year. I just remember the day. I don't know when it was, but I remember it as an experience in and of itself.
I love that. And okay, that's a good segue. So you're saying that you've done this for 50-something years. How old are you?
I will be 63 in a month.
You're one of the pillars of the surf community here.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I never pictured myself being one of the OGs. There always used to be a ladder of older guys that are part of the heritage of the surfing, and I look around the lineup now, I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
I am that now.
Uh-huh.
And there's fewer and fewer of us in number, and there always were. Mm-hmm. But my journey started, I grew up in Gulf Breeze. My earliest memories are back from about 8 years old. Mm-hmm. The longboard era was just ending. There was a shop in town in Gulf Breeze, actually, where I first went with my dad and my brother to get him a surfboard, and it was all longboards. I still can see the image of that in my mind, of going that one day into that surf shop and him picking out a surfboard. I think it was a 9.6 Hobie. Of course, I was not allowed to touch it.
Yeah.
But I often did, and I got in a lot of trouble for playing on it behind the house in the Sound. I grew up looking across at the island towards the Fort Pickens gates, knowing that there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow just across that waterway over those dunes. Used to be really big dunes when you first entered Fort Pickens, all along that drive going into Fort Pickens. You couldn't see the Gulf. Now you can see the Gulf from where I grew up. And then the hurricane of 1969, Hurricane Camille, was one of my earliest memories of seeing surfers that were older. They were even older than my brother, and I didn't know what they were doing. They ran through our yard to get down to the water, and I asked my brother, what are they doing here with their surfboards? He says, they're going to walk down to the point and paddle across to the island because the island's closed.
Wait, I'm sorry, from Gulf Breeze?
Yeah. Do you know where Deer Point is?
I believe so, yeah.
It's one of the closest points to the island where you might have a shot at paddling the 2 miles or how far it is over to the island. And of course, they were on longboards, so they had a lot of board under them. But
still,
I remember I could see them to this day. I could see them walking down the beach or running, and I followed them part of the way because that was my stretch of beach that I learned all about the waterfront and everything. So I followed them to see what they were doing. The visions in my mind of what they were going to find and where they were going. That's how the fire started in me. And obviously watching my brother do it. There's a lot of memories packed into those first 3 years as a surfer, first 3 to 4 years from 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
It's like a lifetime of memories, your childhood memories from as far back as you can remember till probably, end of high school. It seems like a lifetime of memories are burned into your cranial hard drive.
So much is new, so much is novel. Yeah.
I'm kind of a generation, the timing of my generation of surfers around here is the era of the transition from the longboards to what became, what are now called mid-lengths, and then right to those early twin fins that didn't work very well at all. We were just all on, single fins for a while, learned on a single fin, and that affects a lot of our style. But you asked how I stay at the level I'm at. At my age, that generation of the aggressive side of surfing came about, and we saw it in the magazines. Of course, we had to wait every month to see what was going on in the surfing world, and surfing changed from this smooth style to more aggressive, progressive maneuver surfing, more vertical surfing. I was still a teenager when all that started.
You were like perfectly timed, it sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, so I transitioned from the way they surfed. I mean, my first surfing was literally paddling around on one of those old longboards, and then immediately right to one of the shorter ones, and then to the little tiny ones, the horrible twin fins that didn't work at all, and then right back to a kind of a mid-lengthy type surfboard, and single fins, and got into the multi-fin thrusters and all that, and we were still young enough to learn how to use them the way we use them right now.
I loved the way you were talking about watching those surfers run through your yard getting ready for their paddle to pick, and that kind of got me a sense of that excitement involved with surfing. But can you tell me what has kept you surfing for so long?
I think when you reach a certain level of skill at something, you want to continue to challenge yourself to not only maintain it, but get better. It's a race with time and not just ability, your adeptness at the sport, but your body's not letting you do it anymore, either because you didn't stay fit, or got too heavy, or you got injured. Gosh, that's hard.
As you're answering this question, I'm like trying to decide what kind of a person you are, what drives you and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, putting competitive competition aside, it's a true ingrained love for this sport. Surfing in and of itself, just by its nature, it's a selfish sport. Think about, this is a good time here for this, an Easter egg hunt. You set a bunch of little kids loose in the yard and you say, okay, there's Easter eggs all out there, and you little kids, you got to go find them. And there's some of those Easter eggs have something very special in them, and others are just Easter eggs, and they're all like all the rest. Going out in the surf's kind of like that. And you watch those little kids, and they're aggressive, they're selfish, trying to find as many Easter eggs as they can find, but in their mind, they want that really cool gold Easter egg. And so surfing...
I like this analogy.
When you go out and surf, especially around here, surfing here is not easy. You grow up here and live here and learn to surf here, and you learn to surf here and get skilled at it, you can surf anywhere in the world. You may have heard that before. 99% of the time we're surfing choppy, close together, close space waves of poor form. When you teach someone, you realize they don't even see it. They're like, where are the waves? I'm like, they're here. You have to, it's like reading Braille. You have to sift through all of this chop and all this this confusion to find the Easter eggs. But the gold Easter eggs are the ones you're really focused on. So you got to have your head on a swivel, and you got to be a little selfish, because you got to be ready to move and get in position and get into a position of priority where it is your wave and you're not being greedy to the point of breaking the rules. So, and that's one thing that was enforced heavily in my early years. The surfing community was smaller, but there was a core group of guys that enforced the rules out there, and it's twofold. It's courtesy and safety, and respect. And respect is a big one. Us little guys that surfed through the early 70s, and just through the 70s in general, when the original guys were still out there, because the guys that came before me that were adults when I was little, they weren't far removed from the very first guys from around here, who are very few in number now. And there's a couple out there that you should probably interview, but who have some really cool memories from the mid-60s of surfing around here. Respect was taught to us in the lineup, and there was a fear factor involved too. You didn't just rock up into the middle of the main guys and sit and start writing the gold Easter eggs or trying to get one. You just didn't do it. There's a pecking order, and that exists in most places around the world to this day. where there's a very dedicated local crew of surfers. My memory is it all changed kind of in the 90s around here, late 80s into the 90s. That started slipping away, the respect, the awareness of why it's important to be respectful. I mean, you don't learn to surf in a vacuum. I try to tell people that all the time. If you go to one of these foreign countries, these faraway lands where people were discovering surf where no surfer had ever been before, and there's a bunch of little native kids running around, and you give them a surfboard, and of course, they're just totally enchanted by the sight of you and what you're going to go out and ride these waves and never seen it done before. Suddenly they become like I was when those guys went running through my yard, and they're like, wow, this is cool. And you leave them a surfboard. Well, if you come back in 10 years and no other surfer's been there, they're not going to be very good. You left them a surfboard, but they're not going to be very good. They learn by watching and observing, and it rubs off on them. It's an effect. They're in and amongst surfers who are very skilled at the sport, and they learn the proper techniques in the proper ways. But if they're not around it, they don't ever really progress. They don't progress fast enough that you would ever see. That's where the respect comes in. So you get a lot of people that come out and surf and just get right in the mix without ever observing, hey, I should probably sit on the beach first and watch and go, hey, I keep seeing that guy. Oh, and that guy. And that guy. And they seem to be the best ones out there. I'm going to watch what they're doing. But I'm not going to get right up in their grill and try to compete and go toe-to-toe with them. That could end badly. And so that's how we were taught. I learned by watching. I know I did. I mimicked the style of some of them, and of course the famous ones that were in the magazines. I found a picture yesterday of myself from 1977 or something, and I remember it to this day, trying to mimic the stance, just the stance of one of the world champions of the mid-70s. I remember intentionally doing it. There's a couple of pictures of me. I can't get in that stance anymore. It's not flexible enough. It was really cool because style was more important than the progressive, aggressive type of surfing when I came through. Jerry Lopez, Mr. Pipeline, the famous surfer, one of his statements was regarding the essence of style in surfing. He said, you should be able to ride a wave as casually as you walk down the street.
I like that. Yeah,
Think about that for a second. That's what surfing was about. It was about this flowing, cruisy, pretty style. The Aussies came over to the North Shore and they changed that all up. They said, well, we've got a different attitude. We're going the aggressive route. And that's when the style thing faded to the background. But the guys who could blend both, those are the surfers you want to emulate, because that's what was the most appealing to the eye to watch. They had high performance capability and they did it with style. That's another thing you learn by being around more skilled surfers and watching and observing and not just getting right up in the mix and trying to out paddle and take. It is a selfish sport. So there's not a lot of waves to go around. There's not a lot of golden eggs out there.
But we also do it in community.
You're welcome to join the mix if you're willing to be respectful, because I'm one of the first guys that's going to call anybody into a wave. If I see they're in position and they don't realize it's time to start moving, I'll yell, go.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Our generation was a lot, very much into encouraging one another. And even though we're competitive with one another, we're encouraging one another, and we're more vocal, hooting, whistling, and encouraging. And that went away too, in a weird way, in the 90s. You heard a little bit of it. Out there yesterday. I thought it was cool. So when I saw your message late last night, and I was sitting at the airport between midnight and 3 waiting for a plane to come in, and I knew you would want it. You said it right there in the thing. I think, there's a couple of things I want to say. If I were you, I'd probably leave a lot of that out about the whole respect in the lineup, because that probably irritates a lot of people.
I don't know. That's one of my favorite topics, and I think it's one of the touchiest ones. And
exactly.
Because I think it is so important. I almost had a follow-up question, like how did the OGs enforce? Like you were saying, there would be consequences basically if people weren't respectful.
Oh yeah. Well, today in this litigious society, you can't do what those guys used to do.
Got you. Okay.
Okay. So
they got beat up in the parking lot. Is that what you're telling me?
Absolutely. And in the water, there were literally guys out there that we looked up to and feared. One of them actually resined a knife blade on the very tip of the nose of his surfboard. Either a knife or a razor blade. I can't remember. something sharp, resin to the tip of his surfboard. So basically he's saying, don't take off in front of me.
Jesus Christ.
Because this is what's coming. So those guys, some of those guys, a very small group of them, because like I say, the whole crowd around here, the whole surf culture consisted of a smaller group of people. So everybody knew who everybody was. Mm-hmm. And being one of the little guys, I knew, do not cross them up.
Don't
but at
cross
the same
the
time,
guy with a knife on the front of his board.
Yeah. At the same time, some of those guys were the guys that would protect you from some other lunkhead in the lineup who was breaking the rules. Yeah. Or, this is even better, the ones up on the pier slinging lead ling lures at you that could crack your skull. And you may or may not have heard these stories. It happened more than once where one of those guys would be warned by one of the guys who might have a sharp item on the nose of his surfboard. Mm-hmm. He would warn the guy up on the pier, don't do that again, and they do it again, and those guys would literally get out of the water, go up on the pier, punch the guy, and throw him over the rail. Well, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
There was a surf shop. One of the inner lights was in a yellow house up 9th Avenue, north of its last location on Lower 9th. And they had a team meeting, and my brother said, come on, you're coming to the surf team meeting with me. And we go in, and it's all these older guys, and Yancey's standing there, and he said, all right, Johnny, we're getting ready to have the team meeting. You need to watch little Yancey.
Yeah. Oh, no, you got brought in to be the babysitter?
I didn't know this. And so they're down sitting amongst, and back then the racks are full of these glossy single fins with all the surfboards had gloss coats back then and these beautiful airbrushes. And they're all lined up on the wall. And he points to this baby crawling around in a diaper. And he says, that's your job while we have the meeting.
Yep.
And I'm like, I don't know anything about babies. And the first thing little Yancey does when his dad walks away is he said, you got to watch him. Well, he crawls up under the rack of surfboards to try to keep away from me.
Yeah.
and weaving in and out on his hands and knees in between these boards, half knocking them out of the racks. And I'm freaking out, trying to make sure these surfboards don't fall, trying to stop him. And so I had to pick him up. And I wasn't very big. I was a little guy, and I guess he would have been not quite 2, something like that.
Yep.
So that's how far back Yancey and I go. He doesn't remember me. He doesn't remember me from then, but he remembers me as far back as he can remember surfing, because he said, okay, there's my dad and there's the younger guys, that Johnny's one of the younger guys. And so Yancey and I have a bond like that. Yeah, we're buds. And it's weird because I think of him as younger, but now he's over 50 now too. So
yeah, now he's one of the OGs.
Absolutely. Well, and that's the other thing. Back in the day, if you got to be 30, a lot of guys fizzled by the time they were gone. And they're only the core. And it's funny, it's usually the guys that got to be the best at the sport. And that probably lends into an explanation for what keeps you going, is because you develop a level of skill. You say, I'm good at this and I love it. I don't think I ever said that I love this sport. Thank you for watching All Waves Considered. I've been your host, John Gaynor Green. And just remember, there are no bad waves. I hope to see you in the lineup soon.